The fact that you clicked this video tells me one thing. You and I both got to experience Warzone at its peak. Verdansk, the Gulag, the loadouts, and the random friend groups and memories we made along the way.
We're dead the storm. Bez!
Warzone wasn't just a game, it was a global phenomenon. Over 100 million players, billions of views online. It was one of the biggest cultural moments in gaming history. So what the hell happened? Today, we're gonna break that down. Okay, so to really understand exactly what went wrong for Warzone, we first of all have to start where things went right. And that, of course, is at the beginning. March 10th, 2020, Call of Duty Warzone was released to the public, and here's the first thing they got right. It was free to play. Now that might not seem like a big deal hearing that nowadays, but back then this was a huge deal for Call of Duty. For decades, COD had been releasing their yearly game, charging $60, and of course we'd pay every year, no questions asked. The only Call of Duty that had ever been released for free prior to Warzone was Call of Duty Online. And if you're wondering why you've never heard of that, well that's because it was exclusively released in China. And yes, that is Chris Evans you see doing the marketing for the game. Back to the point though, Warzone was free to play and ready to go on March 10th. And here's where things got even better for Warzone. As some of you probably recall, in the early months of 2020, there was this little thing brewing up in the world called COVID-19. And it turns out it actually ended up being a pretty big deal. COVID had already been declared as an international public health emergency at the end of January 2020, but on March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization officially declared the outbreak as a global pandemic. And from there, governments around the world started issuing strict lockdown requirements, social distancing rules, and many other restrictions. It was a unique time in our lives, and we were all basically just stuck in our houses all day, every day, for months on end. Now, of course, it goes without saying that COVID and the lockdowns were a terrible thing for the world, the economy, and many other things. But for Call of Duty, the timing could not have been any better. They released their free-to-play game on March 10th, and then literally the next day, the whole world shuts down and we're all stuck inside with nothing else to do. So it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out what happened next. But here's the numbers anyway. 6 million active players in the first 24 hours, 15 million after 3 days, 30 million after 10 days, and 50 million after a month. The game absolutely skyrocketed. You were playing it, your friends were playing it, your family was playing it, your mum, your dad, your nan, your nan's dog, everybody was playing Warzone. Now, of course, Battle Royale wasn't a new thing. It had been growing in popularity in the years leading up to Warzone. Games like DayZ, PUBG, and H1Z1 popularized the genre, and then Fortnite came along in 2017 and took the genre to a whole new level. After Fortnite blew up, every game developer was scrambling to release their own Battle Royale. DICE tried it with Battlefield, Respawn dropped Apex, and COD even tried their own Battle Royale with Blackout in 2019. But the reason Fortnite was the one that took off was because it had a unique aspect combined with the BR experience, building. So essentially, if you wanted to make a BR that competed with Fortnite, you were going to have to find your own unique twist to bring on top of that classic BR experience. And that's what Warzone managed to do. You see, in every BR prior to Warzone, two things were true. Firstly, the only weapons you could use were found on the floor or in loot boxes. And secondly, you only got one life. If you died, that was it. Game over. So that's what Warzone decided to change. They added loadout drops to the game, which took their classic create a class system made all the way back in Call of Duty 4, and they made it accessible in Warzone. You created your classes in the game menu, and then you could use your own custom weapons in Warzone by purchasing a loadout drop at the buy station. On top of that, Warzone introduced the Gulag. Gone were the days of dying once and the game being over. In Warzone, you got a second chance. When you died, you were sent to the Gulag to have a 1v1 gunfight versus another player who had died in your lobby, and then the winner returned to the game. Now, some Battle Royale purists would argue that having access to your own custom weapons and having the ability to come back into the game after already dying means that the game isn't really a true battle royale. And while this is kinda true, people just didn't care. It was a fun new feature that made the game stand out compared to other BRs, and it suited the casual player base of Call of Duty perfectly. So everybody was having a blast playing the game, and the overall gameplay was great. The guns felt fun to use, the movement felt smooth, while also creating a skill gap for people who could master it. And honestly, the engine that Warzone 1 was built on just felt so good. For most people, Warzone was the closest thing to an actual social life that we had during the lockdowns. Now, the new loadout system not only created a fun experience for the players, but it also pioneered probably one of the biggest injections of new content creators in gaming history. And I should know because I was one of them. Everybody wanted to know the best loadouts to use, and so they went to YouTube and TikTok to find the meta. And this created huge opportunities for new creators to blow up and make a career for themselves. Now, there's probably more positives that I could go over here, but to be honest, some of the positives that I've already mentioned also had downsides. So let's start uncovering some of the cracks that were already starting to show in Warzone. The first being cheaters. There's not really much detail to go into here. This has been Warzone's biggest issue since it was released. The game was, and still is, just infested with cheaters, and there was no anti-cheat in the game to combat this, so we'll come back to this point later. On top of the cheaters, there always seemed to be a new glitch that was being exploited. Stim glitches that give players infinite health, buggy vehicles, rose skins hiding in the dark, gas mask animations, the list goes on. And although the loadout system was definitely a fun feature, players eventually became tired of the endless cycle of finding the new meta. Gone were the days where you could just launch the game and play for a couple of hours with your friends. It got to the point where if you wanted to keep up and compete, before you even stepped foot into Verdansk, you had to watch a 20-minute settings video and then watch another 20-minute loadout video to find out which broken gun you should use. And trust me, there were a lot of them. To this day, I still have nightmares about the DMR. But yeah, the point I'm trying to make is that once the lockdown started to ease and people started to return to normality, the player count of course dropped, and people who had all the time in the world to play the game before were now finding themselves scrambling to keep up because they only had a couple of hours to play in the evenings. They would log on to play a few games, only to find out that their settings were wrong and the loadouts that they had were no longer meta, and then they had to spend an hour leveling up the guns that were meta, and then those guns would only be meta for a week before being nerfed, and then the players would log in to play on the evenings and the weekends again, to find out again that they had to spend another hour leveling up guns to get the other new meta, and it just wasn't a very casual, friendly approach. But nonetheless, Warzone continued to be a success, and we only started to see decline when they did this. Verdansk was destroyed and in came Caldera. Now, before we get into the specifics of Caldera, remember earlier in the video where I mentioned that cheating was Warzone's biggest issue during Verdansk due to the lack of anti-cheat in the game? Well, Activision finally addressed that situation. They announced that a new anti-cheat would be added to the game with Caldera called Ricochet. And of course, we were all delighted with this news. It was finally time to clean up the game and get rid of this cheater epidemic. But as you all know, that didn't happen. Companies that make the cheating software found ways around the anti-cheat, and the problem is still as bad now as it was then. Now, I know this is going to be a bit of a hot take, but the game wasn't actually in that bad of a state during Caldera. Yes, there were still cheaters. Yes, there was still glitches coming out here and there. But Raven Software came in and actually started making some really good quality of life changes, like adding balloons to the map, slower time to kill, and they did a bunch of weapon balancing, which meant that there were less broken guns and there wasn't a new out-and-out meta every other week. But the truth is that despite these positive changes, Caldera just wasn't fun. The design of the map was awful. You basically just had this massive mountain in the middle of the map, and if you didn't land there, you were quite literally fighting an uphill battle to try and win the game. So naturally, the player base decreased a lot during this time, but the game still had a healthy player count on Rebirth Island because of its more fast-paced, casual-friendly gameplay, but obviously that's because you could respawn an unlimited amount of times, basically. And if we're being honest, as fun as Rebirth was, it was essentially glorified multiplayer. The authentic Warzone Battle Royale experience was dying out because Caldera was failing, and the game clearly needed some sort of refresh to get the players back to the main Battle Royale mode. So what did Warzone do next? Well, they took everything that was great about the original Warzone experience and essentially just threw it in the trash. Warzone 2 launched with a 2v2 gulag with a juggernaut AI, broken overpowered AI soldiers around the map, no resurgence mode, no ranked mode, no sprinting while plating, no slide cancelling, no one-shot headshot snipers, limited items in every buy station, different items in every buy station, 2 plates as the default instead of 3, no loadout drops at the buy station, no customizable perk packages, a new backpack looting system instead of the easier floating loot system, and so much more. On top of all of those changes, the game was on a new engine which completely changed the way that Warzone felt. The movement system and the gunplay just felt clunky and slow, and the game had lost that effortless, silky feeling that it once had. I honestly don't think I can ever forgive Infinity Ward for what they did to this game. Now, there's been speculation over the years as to why Warzone was moved to a new engine and why all of these changes were made. One reason was because Infinity Ward wanted to shift focus more towards their new extraction game mode, DMZ. Another theory that was put out there was that the developers didn't feel like they could build the game any further on the previous engine and combat the cheating situation any further. But as we all know, despite the new engine, the cheating situation was still diabolical. Now, whilst all of that was going on, around the same time as Warzone 2 launched, there was a clear shift from Call of Duty into more pop culture collabs, as they were trying to imitate what Fortnite was doing. And so we entered what I like to call the shameless microtransaction era. Now, don't get me wrong, the original Warzone had its fair share of microtransactions too, but most of them seemed to be in theme with a certain in-game event that was going on. A couple of examples of this would be the Hunting of Verdansk event during Halloween, where skins like Ghostface from Scream were at it, and then there was also the time that they added Nakatomi Plaza from Die Hard into Verdansk along with a John McClane skin. But nowadays, when you drop into a Warzone game, you're fighting a squad containing Cheech and Chong, 21 Savage, and Nicki Minaj, while a squad of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are trying to third-party you. The game just lacks any sort of identity anymore and is designed solely for the purpose of trying to get you to spend your money in the store. So basically, after Warzone 2 launched and the player count along with any interest in the game fell off a cliff, each iteration of Warzone that was released afterwards was just trying to undo all of the damage that was done by Warzone 2. They slowly reverted changes like the 2v2 gulag, the AI around the map, loadouts not being in buy stations, and they tried speeding up the gameplay again by bringing things like slide cancelling back. But it was too little, too late. People had moved on, the magic was gone, and people were getting on with their lives. It's now 5 years since the original Warzone released. We're not in a lockdown anymore. People who were playing back then now have jobs to work, families to feed, and they just have no reason to play a game that clearly lost its way. But one thing could maybe save the game. As we all know, Verdansk is making its glorious return. And not only is the map returning, they are basically reverting all of the changes made to Warzone over the years, and they're making it as close as possible to the original authentic experience from 2020. So to give a few examples of this, the original 1v1 gulag is returning, the buy station will have a vertical menu again, all the vehicles from the original Warzone are coming back, all the same contracts like bounties and scavengers return, we're going back to a 150 player count, floating loot is coming back, and the Omni movement system from Black Ops 6 is being tuned to feel more like the original Warzone movement system. There's tons of changes I could go over right now, but essentially what you need to know is that they're trying to make the game feel as close as possible to the original Warzone experience. Now, I don't know what you gather from that, but me personally, I feel like that's an admission of guilt. They know that they truly screwed up with Warzone 2, and they've wasted years since then on doing all of that damage just to get back to what they had in the beginning. Long story short, it's basically like that one Thanos meme.
You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
But look, all the negatives aside, the original Warzone is why I'm sat making this video right now. It gave me and so many others an opportunity to make a career out of something they were passionate about. It was an escape for so many of us during an unprecedented time back in 2020. And this is Call of Duty's last roll of the dice with Warzone. They're very clearly going all in with this update to try and bring back as much of the player base as possible. Now, will Verdansk be enough to save the game? Or is this just going to be a situation where we all go back and play for the nostalgia and then realize that the game we once loved is gone and will never be the same again?